Captain Anderson stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the scorched remains of what used to be a table of pastries. The air inside the USS Resolute's diplomatic chamber was thick with the scent of burnt sugar and smoldering plastic mingled with the heavy silence that followed the aliens' display of power across the room. The alien ambassador, a towering creature covered in shimmering blue scales with 6 unblinking eyes, stood with the kind of presence that made the crew instinctively hold their breath. It retracted the long appendage that moments earlier had acted as a weapon, still humming faintly with residual energy. "Humans of Earth," it declared in a voice like grinding stone, "you will surrender and offer tribute to the Galactic Empire or face annihilation." Its words fell into the silence like iron into water, rippling through the minds of every crew member present. Anderson remained calm, though inside he could feel the tension crackling through his muscles like static electricity. Glanced at Commander Reynolds standing just behind him, who looked like he was fighting off a smirk, clearly unimpressed by their guest. "Perhaps we should discuss your demands in the war room." Captain Anderson said, his voice even steady, betraying none of the storm brewing beneath his calm demeanor. Reynolds nodded. "Indeed, Captain," he replied, keeping his amusement barely contained. They exited the chamber, the alien following closely, its many eyes shifting as they took in the design of the ship. The USS Resolute was a marvel of human engineering, sleek, efficient, built for diplomacy, but with enough firepower to hold its own in a fight. The crew in the corridors stepped aside silently, eyes tracking the procession, whispering among themselves. Their unease barely concealed the alien radiated disdain with every movement. But beneath the diplomatic protocols and careful facade, Anderson could sense something more dangerous: arrogance. The kind of arrogance born from centuries of conquest. As they entered the war room, the long metallic table stood empty, save for a single data pad, its clean surface a stark contrast to the scorched mess left behind in the dining area. Anderson and Reynolds took their seats across from the alien. The creature loomed above them, its voice once again filling the room. "The Galactic Empire requires your planet's resources, your technology, and your servitude. Resistance will not be tolerated." Anderson leaned forward slowly, as if contemplating the absurdity of what was being asked, his tone deliberate and measured. "And if we refuse," the alien's eyes darkened and its voice dropped to a menacing growl, "then you will be destroyed." Reynolds crossed his arms, clearly unimpressed, and spoke with the kind of casual defiance that had come to define humanity. "That's quite a stark choice, but you see, humans have a long history of not taking kindly to threats." Anderson raised a hand, halting him. "We understand the gravity of this proposal," he said, his gaze locked on the alien's many eyes. "And decisions of this magnitude are not made lightly." The ambassador stared at him for a moment, the shifting colors in its eyes betraying some level of calculation. Then it spoke. "You have 1 Earth day. We will expect your answer." As it exited the room, the tension remained hanging in the air, like the echo of a distant explosion. Reynolds turned toward Anderson, his earlier humor gone. "What's the plan?" Captain Anderson didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. For a long moment, then he spoke. "We run." Reynolds looked at him, confused. "Sir, not in the way you think, Commander. We're not running away. We're playing for time. We need to inform Earth, gather our strength, and prepare for war. This empire underestimates us, and that's going to be their first mistake." Reynolds nodded slowly, a smile creeping back into his expression. "I like the sound of that." What followed was a frenzy of movement. The bridge was abuzz with activity as encrypted messages were sent back to Earth, warnings detailed and urgent, demanding immediate response and preparation across the planet. The crew of the Resolute moved with purpose, checking weapon systems, boosting shield integrity, ensuring engines were at full capacity. Anderson walked among them, offering words of encouragement, guiding their focus, making sure every single member of his team understood what was at stake. This was not a skirmish or an isolated incident. It was the spark of something far greater and far deadlier. As the deadline approached, Anderson called a final meeting with his senior officers, the war room now brimming with tension and readiness. They reviewed their options, mapped out possible contingencies, and reinforced the one unifying truth: humanity would not surrender. The alien ambassador returned precisely on schedule, stepping into the room with the same arrogance as before, its presence still as overwhelming and suffocating as the first moment they met your answer. Humans, it demanded. Anderson stood tall, shoulders squared, voice clear and resolute. We refuse. Humanity will never bow to tyrants for a moment. There was only silence, then the alien's voice rose with fury. Then you will be destroyed instantly. The Resolute roared to life. The lights dimmed as the ship shifted to battle mode. The bridge was alive with movement, crew taking their positions. Systems activating one by one. The ship's defenses rising like a sleeping giant awakened by war. Captain Anderson took his place at the center of it all, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. All hands to battle stations, prepare for engagement. The moment had arrived and humanity would not falter. The war room buzzed with activity the moment the alien ambassador departed and the heavy door sealed behind him. Captain Anderson stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the decision settle into the air around him before speaking. He turned to his officers, his voice calm and steady. Despite the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind, we are not going to surrender, and we are not going to give them what they want, but we are also not going to attack blindly. This empire has power and reach, and we are going to need every advantage we can muster to survive the next few days. Commander Reynolds stepped closer, nodding in agreement. If we are playing for time, then we better use it well, Captain. We will need the full force of Earth's defenses and every ally we have. Anderson nodded without hesitation, his mind already racing through the protocols necessary to initiate full planetary mobilization. Send a secure transmission to Earth. Tell them exactly what we are facing, and that time is not on our side. I want priority clearance and immediate coordination with the Defense Council. Reynolds moved quickly to carry out the order, while Anderson activated the ship's internal comms. This is the captain, he began, his voice echoing through the corridors of the Resolute. We are now on full combat alert. I want all departments operational and ready in the next 2 hours. We do not know what is coming, but we know it is coming fast. Prepare for the worst and expect the impossible. The crew responded immediately, dropping into formation. Routines honed through countless drills and war games came alive in the faces of real fear and real responsibility. Anderson could see it in their eyes as he moved through the ship, offering calm encouragement and sharp directives. Everyone understood what was at stake. Earth was no longer facing a theoretical threat. This was now a countdown to open conflict. In the command center, the communications team established a tight beam link to Earth, a high-security encrypted channel that bypassed standard relays and went straight to the Defense Council. Within minutes, the signal was received, and Anderson found himself speaking directly to Admiral Cole, one of the most decorated strategists in Earth's military history. Captain, the Admiral said, his voice clipped, and to the point, I read your transmission twice. Are you absolutely certain about the threat? Anderson didn't hesitate. I watched the alien myself, Admiral. I listened to his demand, and I smelled the smoke from the table he destroyed. They want our planet, our people, and our surrender in 24 hours, or they promise annihilation. Cole let out a slow breath. I believe you, Captain, but this is bigger than just your ship. We need verification. We need eyes. Anderson nodded. I am transmitting all ship logs, sensor data, and visual records. Now you will see what I saw, but understand this, Admiral. Even if the Council chooses to negotiate, I will not be handing over my crew. We are already preparing for combat. Cole gave a short nod, approval barely masked behind protocol. Good, I will bring this before the Council, but I suspect we will not be alone in choosing resistance. Earth has been preparing for threats like this, even if most hoped they would never arrive. You will have support. Anderson ended the call and turned back to his officers. The look in his eyes was sharp and deliberate. Prep. The tactical systems bring the reactor to maximum efficiency. I want our shield buffers tested and reinforced. We need the ship to be ready to survive a siege or escape from one. In the hangar deck, engineers swarmed around the auxiliary crafts, loading them with emergency supplies and upgrading their defensive protocols. Pilots were briefed on rapid deployment maneuvers, while security teams checked weapon lockers, ensuring that every rifle, drone, and personal shield was functional and within easy reach above them. Technicians in the command center monitored the long-range sensors, scanning for any sign of approaching vessels. The hours slipped by, marked by nothing but the rhythm of orders being given and carried out, and the hum of machinery being calibrated for battle. Anderson walked from deck to deck, noting with pride the focus of his crew. Even the youngest ensigns moved with purpose. Fear was present. Yes, but it was not panic. It was fuel as the final hour approached. Anderson gathered his senior staff in the briefing room. A holographic display hovered in the center, showing their position in relation to Earth and the projected arrival path of any possible fleet. Reynolds was the first to speak. "We are ready as we are going to be. Sir, weapons systems are charged, shields are at full strength, and the ship is operating at peak efficiency." Lieutenant Harris from Sensors added, "We have a drone net deployed around the ship, and our stealth systems are active. If they come in quietly, we will still see them before they see us." Anderson nodded. "We have one more decision to make. Do we stay here or reposition closer to Earth?" Reynolds hesitated, then replied, "Staying here keeps us off their most direct route. It gives us time to flank or disrupt their advance. But if we go back to Earth, we strengthen the home front." Anderson considered both options, carefully knowing each came with its own risks. If they stayed away, they might be isolated. If they returned, they might lead the enemy straight to Earth. Then he made the call. "We stay for now. We are the forward eyes. And if we see them first, we strike first. I want 2 recon drones dispatched to sweep the sector and alert Earth if anything changes. Move out," the team broke formation, heading back to their stations, while Anderson stood alone in the war room, his gaze drifting over the holographic starfield in front of him. For a moment, he allowed himself to think of home. The oceans, the sky, the people who had no idea that an alien empire had just threatened their existence, and that it was now up to a single ship and its crew to hold the line. He clenched his fists, steadying his breath. The weight was enormous, but it was not unfamiliar. He had trained for moments like this, lived for the kind of pressure that broke lesser commanders and forged stronger ones. Finally, the moment came. The countdown struck 0. The war room darkened, the lights across the ship shifted to combat red, and the internal comms flickered to life with a single calm message from Anderson. All stations prepare for contact. The game had begun, and humanity was playing for survival. The moment the alien ambassador stepped back into the war room, demanding a response. Captain Anderson stood from his seat with a calm resolve that masked the fire in his chest. He met the creature's gaze and said clearly and without hesitation, "We refuse your offer. Humanity will never bow to tyrants." There was a brief moment of stillness as the meaning of his words sank into the room, and then fury erupted in the alien's expression. Its eyes burned with rage and its voice thundered through the chamber. "Then you will be destroyed before the ambassador could take another step." The USS Resolute came alive, every system on board activated in perfect unison, as if the ship itself had been waiting for this very moment. Alarms sounded and warning lights cast a red hue across every deck. The bridge crew moved fast, falling into formation at their stations. Shields raised, engines primed, and weapons locked on target. Anderson stepped onto the bridge, surrounded by the heartbeat of his crew and the humming of a ship now fully awake. "This is it all. Hands battle stations. This is not a drill. We are under imminent threat. Defend the ship with everything you have." Commander Reynolds was already at tactical barking orders as the alien vessel outside powered up its own systems. The Resolute fired the first shot, a coordinated barrage that struck the enemy hull. With precise force, the blast sent ripples of light cascading over their shields, revealing their weaknesses. Almost instantly, the enemy responded, returning fire with terrifying power. But the Resolute held steady its advanced defense grid, absorbing the brunt of the attack. Lieutenant Harris called out from sensors. "Captain, enemy ship is charging their main weapon." Anderson's heart pounded. He turned to Reynolds to direct all fire at their primary cannon. "Now we need to disable it before they can fire." Reynolds redirected the ship's arsenal, unleashing a concentrated strike on the glowing section of the alien vessel. With each second that passed, the enemy's weapon glowed brighter, signaling that it was nearly ready to fire. The countdown was called out loud. 10 seconds, 9-8. Harris's voice was sharp and clear. Everyone on the bridge held their breath as the ship shook under continued bombardment. The Resolute pressed forward through the storm, 543, and then a blinding explosion erupted from the enemy ship, their main weapon overloaded and collapsed under the relentless pressure. From the Resolute's barrage, a wave of light and debris flooded space, and for a moment there was only silence. Then the bridge erupted with cheers, but Anderson remained focused, his expression hard as steel. Status report. He commanded Reynolds check the screens. Their main weapon is gone, sir, but they are launching fighter swarms and preparing a second assault. Prepare for close combat. Anderson ordered, his voice unwavering. All hands brace for incoming hostile fighters. The crew knew what that meant. They had trained for this. They had simulated every possible scenario, but this was no simulation. Now the enemy fighters closed in like a swarm of mechanized wasps descending from the void. The Resolute's point defense systems kicked in guns, tracking and eliminating targets in a brilliant ballet of fire. And light explosions flickered across the ship's exterior as enemy fighters met their end in waves, but for everyone destroyed, two more seemed to appear. Captain, our shields are down to 30%. Reynolds warned we cannot take much more of this. Anderson nodded. We end this. Now target their engines, prepare the railguns, and fire on my mark. He looked at the screen, watching the enemy ship maneuver, slowly trying to outflank them. Not today. Fire the railguns launched a volley of high-velocity projectiles that screamed through space, slamming into the enemy engines with devastating force. The result was instant. The ship buckled under the impact. Power systems across its hull flickered and failed. Its engines erupted in a cascade of sparks and flame. Direct hit, shouted Harris. They are dead in the water. Anderson allowed himself a rare thin smile. Finish them off, bring everything we have to bear. The Resolute surged forward, its main guns opening fire again. The alien ship crumbled under the storm of human firepower until it was nothing more than a drifting shell caught in the gravity of its own failure. Once again, the bridge erupted in shouts of triumph, but Anderson raised his hand. Stay alert, he said quietly. This may not be the only one. As the wreckage floated in space, the Resolute continued scanning the area, ensuring no more enemy vessels were hiding just out of range. Anderson walked to the observation window, his gaze fixed on the scattered pieces of metal and flame drifting in the black void. This was a message, one that echoed far beyond the battlefield. Humanity would not kneel, not to the Galactic Empire, not to any force that sought to break their spirit back on Earth. The transmission of victory had already been received. The Defense Council took immediate action, mobilizing their fleets, building up planetary defenses, and preparing for what they knew would be a greater war to come. The Empire had sent an ambassador with threats and demands, but humanity had answered with fire and fury, and Anderson knew deep down that this was only the beginning. As the bridge returned to a state of readiness and repairs were initiated, the crew moved with a sense of unity and resolve. They had faced overwhelming odds and come out alive, but they all understood what that meant. More enemies would come. The Empire would not let this stand. They had embarrassed them, and that meant retaliation would be swift and merciless. Anderson turned from the window, his voice calm but resolute. Set a course for Earth, he said. We have a war to win. The engines of the Resolute roared back to bound. Life in the ship turned its nose homeward, speeding through the void, the wreckage of their first victory shrinking behind them as they raced toward the coming storm. The journey back to Earth was brief, but it felt heavier. With each passing second, the crew of the USS Resolute worked tirelessly to restore full functionality to the ship. After the battle damage had been assessed and minor repairs initiated, Anderson remained silent for most of the return flight, his thoughts consumed not only by their narrow victory but also by what he knew was coming next. The Galactic Empire would not forget this humiliation, and they would not hesitate to respond the moment the Resolute docked at Earth's main orbital station. The Elysium, a storm of urgency met them. Technicians scrambled to refuel and resupply the ship. Medics stood ready to receive injured crew, and security forces ensured the landing bays remained locked down tight. Anderson stepped off the boarding ramp, greeted by Admiral Cole, who stood with arms crossed and a gaze like steel. Welcome back, Captain. The Admiral said your report was eventful. Anderson gave a short nod. They came with demands and we sent them home in pieces, but make no mistake, Admiral, this empire has teeth. They have tech firepower and organization to match any force we've seen before? Cole nodded again, his tone clipped and focused. Then we prepare for more inside the Admiral's war room. Anderson and Reynolds laid out the full scope of what had occurred from the initial contact and threat to the full-scale engagement that ended in the alien ship's destruction. Cole absorbed every detail without interruption. When the briefing concluded, he leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped in front of him. The Council has already decided we will not surrender. We will fight. Anderson felt a quiet affirmation rise within him, but Cole was not finished. We also need a strategy. They will be back, and they will not come alone. They will come in waves, and we cannot afford to play defense. Forever, Reynolds stepped forward, offering a thought. We need to disrupt them. We need to hit them where it hurts their supply lines, their communication hubs. Their leadership agreed. Cole replied, and we may have just the target. Our intelligence points to a planet deep in their territory, known as Primus. It's heavily fortified, but it's also the heart of their command structure. If we can strike there and take out their leadership, we might destabilize the whole empire. Anderson studied the holographics, star map that flickered in front of him. Primus was buried deep inside enemy space, surrounded by patrols and defense grids. It would take precision, stealth, and speed to even get close, let alone land a team and accomplish the objective. That's a bold move, Captain Anderson said. We would need the best we have. Cole responded, you will have them. I am authorizing full use of Black Ops Division, 3 elite squads, handpicked for infiltration, sabotage, and high-value target removal. You will lead the mission. Personally, your ship will be upgraded, outfitted with every advantage we can spare. Anderson nodded, once understood. Admiral failure is not an option, and we will not fail over the next 48 hours. The Resolute was transformed. Her hull reinforced her systems, upgraded with the most advanced stealth and countermeasure technology available from Earth Command. Anderson handpicked every member of the assault team, soldiers who had survived the impossible, seasoned veterans of deep space combat, experts in close quarters infiltration and electronic warfare. Commander Reynolds would be at his side, along with tactical engineer Lieutenant Vale Demolitions, expert Sergeant Kwan, and field medic Dr. Lyra. Each one had been tested in battle, and each one had never failed when the Resolute launched once again from Elysium. The crew stood ready not just to fight, but to strike the very heart of the Galactic Empire. The journey was long and tense as they crossed deep into enemy-controlled space. They traveled in complete radio silence, relying on the cloaking systems to hide their presence. The deeper they went, the more real the mission became. Every scan, every maneuver held life or death weight as Primus came into view. It was clear that the intelligence was right. It was no ordinary command post. The planet was ringed by orbital defense stations, sensor satellites, and patrol fleets. But Anderson's team had a plan. They waited for a scheduled shift change in the patrol routes and then slipped. Through a blind spot in the sensor grid, navigating with precision and nerves of steel, they descended into the atmosphere, the ship ghosting past radar nets and signal traps. They landed under cover of darkness in a ravine shielded by natural rock formations and electromagnetic interference. They moved quickly, disembarking from the ship and making their way on foot through the terrain. The sky above them was a wash of red and black, the land below littered with strange flora and jagged stone. Formations. Anderson took point, guiding the team through the checkpoints toward the facility entrance, which was guarded by 2 towering mechs and a squad of alien soldiers using synchronized tactics and cloaked gear. The team took them down silently, then entered the base. The interior of the command center was a labyrinth of corridors, surveillance nodes, and security barriers, but the team advanced with ruthless efficiency, taking down guards, rerouting power, and planting jammers to block communication. The deeper they went, the more resistance they encountered. And by the time they reached the central control chamber, alarms had begun to sound. The element of surprise was gone, but the mission was not over. Anderson kicked the door open, leading his team into the chamber. Weapons raised, the alien leadership stood waiting, and one of them smiled, a cold and calculated gesture. You came far, humans, it said, but did you really think we would not be prepared with that enemy? Forces flooded the room and chaos erupted. Anderson gave the order, fall back, regroup, and fight our way out. The battle that followed was close, brutal, and unrelenting as Anderson's team fought their way toward the secondary exit. Clearing corridors and sealing doors behind them, Sergeant Kwan was hit but refused to slow down. Vale hacked through a security gate just in time to keep them moving, and Reynolds provided covering fire as they reached the outer access tunnel. The Resolute was waiting, engines hot and weapons. Primed, the team scrambled aboard, and within seconds the ship launched, tearing through the atmosphere as enemy fire chased them from below. Anderson collapsed into his seat, breath-ragged blood on his uniform, but a fire still burning in his eyes. They had made it out alive, and they had sent a message. The heart of the Empire had been breached, and though they had not destroyed it, they had wounded its pride and shaken its confidence. The battle was not over, but the spark had been lit and the fire was spreading fast. The escape from Primus had not been clean. It had not been quiet, and it had certainly not gone unnoticed by the Galactic Empire. Captain Anderson stood on the bridge of the Resolute, eyes fixed on the stars as the ship hurtled through space away from enemy territory. His mind raced with everything that had happened. The mission had been a partial success. They had infiltrated the heart of the enemy, shaken their command, and escaped with their lives. But the cost had been high, and the consequences were coming. The transmission from Admiral Cole came in just as the ship approached Earth, his voice sharp and urgent. Captain Anderson, report to the war room immediately upon arrival. We have much to discuss. The Resolute docked at the Elysium under the cover of night, the station now fully lit with defensive protocols. Earth had received the warning and responded in kind. Anderson and Reynolds moved quickly through the halls of the station, arriving in the war room where Cole and several high-ranking officials stood around a massive holographic display. Red markers flickered across the galaxy map, each one representing a fleet, each one moving toward Earth. Your mission on Primus was successful in sowing chaos, Cole said without ceremony, but now the Empire is retaliating with full force. They are launching an all-out assault on Earth. The room fell silent for a moment, the implications settling like cold ash over a dying fire. Anderson met Cole's gaze. What's our status? Earth is ready, Cole answered, but just barely. We have mobilized every available ship, every soldier. Every defense system we have built over decades is now online, but the enemy numbers are overwhelming. Their fleet is massive and heavily armed. We believe their plan is twofold. First, break our defenses in orbit, then land troops on the surface and strike key infrastructure. Reynolds stepped forward. What about the civilians? Cole nodded. We are evacuating as many as we can to underground shelters, but if the lines break, there is no guarantee. Anderson let the silence hang before he spoke. Then we hold the line, whatever it takes. The orders were clear. The strategy was in motion, and now it was time to execute it. Anderson returned to the Resolute, which was immediately resupplied and rearmed. Every corridor buzzed with tension, but no fear, only resolve. All hands. This is the Captain, Anderson said through the ship's internal comms. We are about to face the greatest threat humanity has ever known, but we will face it together. We'll fight not for glory or revenge, but for our families, for our future, and for our home. Let's show them what it means to be human. The response echoed through the ship, a wave of unshakable unity that coursed through every deck, every system, every person, as the Resolute joined the formation above Earth. It became part of a vast armada stretching across the atmosphere. Ships of every class, every size, every purpose, all ready to defend their world. When the enemy fleet arrived, it was as if the sky had been torn open, the blackness of space filled with ships, their design alien and brutal. They moved in tight formation, unrelenting. In their approach, the first contact was instantaneous. The void exploded with light as both sides opened fire. The Resolute weaved through the chaos, its engines screaming as it dodged incoming fire and launched volleys in return. Anderson stood firm on the bridge, calling out targets, issuing commands. Reynolds directed fire. Harris relayed status reports, but the enemy kept coming, each wave more intense than the last. Captain, we are taking heavy fire. Our shields are down to 60%, Harris called out. Maintain position, Anderson ordered. We cannot let them break through, not here, not now. But despite their best efforts, the enemy advanced. Earth's defensive grid fired with ruthless precision, but cracks began to form. "They are pushing us back," Admiral Anderson reported over the channel. Cole responded, "Fall back to the secondary defense line. Draw them in and hit them hard." The Earth fleet executed the maneuver, falling into tighter formation, drawing the enemy closer to the planet, but they did not fall easily. They fought for every inch of space, for every second of time. The second line held, but just barely, and then the alert came through: enemy dropships breaking through, entering the atmosphere. Multiple locations, Reynolds called out. "They are going for the power plants, communication hubs, military bases." Anderson's jaw tightened. "We need to intercept them. Now Harris, take command of the ship." "Reynolds, you are with me." They rushed to the hangar, boarding a shuttle that launched through the chaos and descended toward one of the primary energy installations, already under siege from the air. The devastation was clear. Explosions rippled across the landscape. Columns of smoke rose into the sky, and enemy troops poured into the facility. Anderson hit the ground running, rifle in hand, directing squads to secure the perimeter and push back the invaders. Reynolds coordinated the assault teams, moving with lethal precision as they cleared building after building. The fighting was fierce, relentless, close quarters, combat that left no room for hesitation, no room for fear. "Reinforcements incoming," Reynolds shouted as a second wave of Earth forces arrived, turning the tide. Anderson felt a surge of hope. They were holding. They were winning. "Captain, perimeter is secure," Reynolds said over comms. Anderson surveyed the battlefield. Bodies, machines, debris, but still they stood good. He said, "Now let's make sure it stays that way for hours." The fighting continued across the planet. Every continent, every region, every city under siege. But Earth did not break. The people did not bow. And when the sun finally rose over a scorched sky, the enemy fleet was in retreat, battered and broken, fleeing back into the void. The cost had been high: cities, damaged lives lost. The scars would remain for generations. But so would the resolve. Back aboard the Resolute, Anderson stood before his crew, addressing them. "One final time today, we faced annihilation and stood our ground. We showed the galaxy that humanity does not surrender, that we do not run, that we fight for each other and for our right to exist. And we will continue to fight as long as we must." The cheers that followed were not of celebration, but of survival and unity. Earth had bled, but it had not fallen, and now it would rise stronger than ever. As the dust settled and the enemy fleets disappeared beyond Earth's outer orbit, the aftermath of the battle began to reveal itself in grim detail. Captain Anderson stood on the scorched tarmac of the southern defense zone, his uniform stained with dirt, ash, and blood. He could still hear the ringing in his ears from the last explosion that rocked the sky above him. Hours earlier, the planet had been on the brink of collapse. Now it stood bloodied, but unbroken. Soldiers limped through the wreckage, helping comrades, checking for survivors, and restoring whatever systems could still operate. Makeshift medi tents lined the perimeter of the battlefield, and in each of them lay wounded men and women who had stared death in the face and refused to blink. Anderson moved through the site, slowly speaking to those he passed, offering a firm grip on the shoulder or a quiet word of recognition. The human spirit had never been forged in peace. It had been refined in fire, and today that fire had been a furnace of survival. Commander Reynolds approached from the edge of the site, his armor battered, one eye bruised. But his voice steady. "The northern line held, sir, just barely, but we pushed them back." Anderson nodded silently, glancing toward the ridge where plumes of smoke still rose into the sky. "Any word from Cole?" "Not yet, but the comms are back online. Earth Command is coordinating response efforts. The worst of it is over for now." Anderson looked at the ruined landscape around them, the trenches, the torn-up roads, the burnt-out husks of once fully operational defense systems. He had no doubt this was only the beginning. The Galactic Empire had tasted resistance, and their pride would not let them walk away from it. Back aboard the USS Resolute, the crew worked to restore full function. The engineering team, led by Lieutenant Vale, had rerouted power from non-essential systems to reinforce the shields and stabilize weapons arrays. Tech crews swept through the ship, checking systems, patching damage and recalibrating the long-range scanners. With every action, they took the ship came back to life inch by inch. Its hull still carried the scars of battle, but its heart beat steady. Anderson stood on the bridge once again, looking out at the stars. They had won, but it had not felt like victory. Not in the way stories made it sound. There were no grand parades, no laughter, only silence, grit, and a deep exhaustion that clung to every motion, every breath. But there was also something else, something deeper, a growing resolve that would not be extinguished. Admiral Cole finally came through on the primary channel, his face haggard from lack of sleep and his voice gravelly from hours of speaking over static and tension. "Anderson," he said, "good to see you in one piece. Your team held out better than most. You and your crew did what most considered impossible. The Empire came for our throat and we spat in their face." Anderson gave a tired nod. "We held, Admiral, but we paid for it in blood." Cole looked away for a moment. His jaw clenched, then looked back. "We all did, but what matters is that Earth still stands, and now we prepare. For what comes next, they won't stop, you know?" Anderson replied. "They'll regroup. They'll come again." Cole nodded slowly. "They will, which is why we are moving to the next phase. The Council has authorized a new initiative. We are forming a coalition, not just military, but political, economic, strategic. Earth cannot stand alone forever, and after what happened today, we no longer have to." Anderson raised an eyebrow. "Coalition, with whom?" Cole smiled grimly. "With everyone the Empire has threatened, subjugated, or destroyed the broadcast of your battle, the way the Resolute fought the way. You let it was seen by more than just our own people. It made it through the cracks, through rebel networks, fringe colonies, even systems deep inside enemy space are now sending word they want to talk, they want to fight." Reynolds stepped into the frame on Anderson's side. The room suddenly filled with a different kind of energy, one not of tension but of purpose. "So this is how it starts," Anderson said, "not with a formal declaration but with fire and defiance." Cole nodded. "And we will fan that fire as high as it will go." Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. The battle, the survival, the refusal to kneel. Cities that had been on the brink of collapse now swelled with determination. Manufacturing centers turned their focus to weaponry, and defense civil volunteers enlisted in droves in regions once divided politically now found common cause. The media played footage of the Resolute standing its ground of soldiers, fighting in the mud and smoke, and of Earth itself lighting up with the glow of resistance. Anderson addressed his crew one more time that evening, standing before them not as a captain, not as a commander, but as a man who had seen the worst of what could be and still chosen to believe in what must be ahead of us. Is a long road, he said, and it will not be easy. There will be more battles, more losses, more sacrifice. But every single person on this ship, every voice in this room has proven that when the time comes to make a stand, we do not waver, we do not break, we rise, we fight, and we endure. The crew responded not with cheers, but with quiet nods of agreement, a solemn oath of purpose sealed not in celebration, but in truth. The days that followed were spent rebuilding, rearming, and reaching out. Earth had changed, and in doing so had become something new. A beacon not just of survival, but of rebellion against tyranny, and it all began with a single word: refused. The final assault came without warning. The remnants of the Galactic Empire's fleet no longer scattered, regrouped, and reforged themselves into a spear point aimed directly at Earth. But this time humanity was ready. Anderson stood on the bridge of the Resolute, the crew around him silent and focused. The last days had been spent coordinating with new allies, rebel cells, sympathetic colonies, even former enemies of the Empire. All had reached out in the wake of Earth's defiance, and now many had sent what ships and troops they could spare to stand in a unified line. It was not a massive armada, but it was a symbol, one that said Earth did not stand alone, and the Empire would no longer march unchallenged. The sensors lit up the moment the enemy fleet exited hyperspace. Dozens of warships, cruisers, and assault carriers cut through the stars, forming up with brutal efficiency. Anderson stared at the screen and spoke with calm authority. "All ships hold formation. Do not engage until my signal." The orders echoed across the fleet, each captain, each soldier waiting in the silence as the enemy drew closer. Then without a word, the Empire opened fire. Lasers and missiles lit up the void, and the battle began. The Resolute surged forward alongside its allies, weapons blazing, shields humming under the pressure of sustained hits, Reynolds barked commands from the tactical station, directing fire toward the lead ships, while Harris monitored shield levels and coordinated repair drones. Enemy fighters swept in from the flanks, but Earth's newest point, defense systems designed after analyzing the first wave of attacks, responded with brutal precision. The enemy lost dozens of crafts in the first volley, but they did not slow. They came harder, more desperate, more angry. Anderson pushed the ship to its limits, weaving through debris fields, dodging capital fire, and launching coordinated counterstrikes at weak points in the enemy formation. Captained multiple enemy boarding parties inbound. Harris shouted they're targeting the power core and bridge. Anderson clenched his jaw, seal off decks 4 through 7, redirect internal security squads, and engage them with lethal force. No one gets through, not one step. Reynolds turned to him with a grim nod and left to lead the defense in person as the ship rocked under internal explosions. Anderson took the comm and addressed the crew. This is the final stand. You all know what we fight for today. Not for conquest, not for power, but for the right to live free, to stand without chains, and to protect those who cannot. Protect themselves, hold the line, and remember why we fight in the lower levels of the ship. Fierce combat erupted between human defenders and enemy boarders. Every corridor became a battlefield, every stairwell a last stand. Reynolds fought alongside the security teams, pushing back wave after wave, refusing to give ground. Above in space, the tide was slowly turning as the smaller Allied ships picked off enemy stragglers, and the Resolute dealt punishing blows to the enemy carriers. Vale rerouted power to the main gun, and with one final charge unleashed a blast that split an enemy command ship in half. The explosion lit up the battlefield and sent a ripple of panic through the remaining invaders. Anderson saw the hesitation in their movements and knew it was time. He opened the wideband comm to the entire human fleet. All ships, this is Captain Anderson. Now we end it, focus fire on their flagship, and break them once and for all. The sky became a blinding storm of energy, weapons and kinetic blasts as every remaining Earth ship turned its guns on the massive Imperial command vessel. The enemy resisted, fighting with desperation, but the combined firepower was too much. Their shields failed, their hull ruptured, and with one final detonation, the flagship was gone. The remaining enemy ships turned and fled. Routed, broken, and defeated, the battlefield fell quiet, the silence ringing louder than any explosion. Anderson collapsed into his seat. Not from injury, but from pure exhaustion. He looked around at his crew, every one of them worn, bruised, but alive. Reynolds limped back to the bridge, smoke still clinging to his armor. We did it. Captain Anderson stood and looked out the viewport into the darkness, where only moments ago death had hovered so close. Yes, we did, but now comes the harder part, rebuilding and remembering what we lost and what we fought for. Earth declared victory, not with parades, but with candles held high, for those who never came home. The losses were heavy, but the resolve was heavier. The world began to rise from the ashes, not just as a planet, but as a beacon across the star's colonies once silent. Now stood Defiant, the Empire fractured not just from defeat, but from the spark that had spread rebellion. The Resolute became a symbol, a legend, a ship that said no when everyone else bowed, and Anderson became not a hero in the stories, but a name whispered by those who remembered how close it had all come to ending. The lesson was not in the technology, not in the weapons or tactics, but in the unity, the choice to stand together when it mattered most. It reminded humanity, and perhaps the galaxy, that freedom is not granted. It is earned and defended again and again. And sometimes the smallest refusal can ignite a revolution. In a world that often seems too large to change, it is those who dare to stand firm who shape its future. Never forget that even when the odds are impossible, even when you are outnumbered and outgunned, you still have the power to say no. And that one word can change everything.